Hello friends and welcome to Hitbullseye. My name is Manish and in this video series we are discussing important topics for the purpose of CUET. इससे पहले बहुत सारी वीडियोस में हम पॉलिटिकल साइंस से रिलेटेड 12th क्लास पॉलिटिकल साइंस से रिलेटेड काफ़ी सारे टॉपिक्स डिस्कस कर चुके हैं, जिसमें कि हमने स्टार्टिंग से थीम वाइज शुरू किया अबाउट द कोल्ड वॉर इंडियन पॉलिटिक्स, cold war in international politics in fact. So we started from what a cold war is, then we went on to discussing the bipolarity in the world in 20th century. Then we discussed the unipolar system where the USSR had collapsed and USA became the hegemonic world power. उसके बाद हमने उसके आगे कंटिन्यू करते गए and then we went on to discuss the security in the contemporary world. Then we discussed the South Asian region, the rise of other powers like China, like ASEAN, like SAARC. And now in this particular class we are going to see the global action on environment, or the role of environment in global security. It might sound a bit odd that what role can possibly environment play in global politics, but that is exactly what we are going to understand. So environment is something that has acquired quite a lot of significance in modern times, because it's like all the Western countries over the past, let's say 200 years or so, they have done so much of harm to the environment, and they have generated such a high quality of life for themselves. And all the European countries, North America, they can be blamed for that, because it is a scientific assessment by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that of all the carbon that is there in the environment today, more than 90% is due to the pre-1950 the pre-1950 as well as the emissions that have been done by North America and the European countries. That means the majority of blame has to be apportioned to those countries rather than the developing countries like India and China. And that is also the argument that the world and the developing countries led by India, follow when in the global stage. So environment, we did not understand the importance of environment, like the world as a whole did not understand the importance of environment until very late in the late 1900s. We started realizing that climate change is a reality and the entire world will have to face the consequences of climate change only by 1970s, 80s, 90s. And then we started taking actionable steps. But till then, and even now in fact, the resources, especially the fossil fuels, wherever they are found, because it's a natural thing, you cannot shift natural resources from one place to another. By nature, they are found naturally in a place. For example, the Middle East or the Western Asia, as we call it, is the place, like the Gulf as we call it, where the majority of crude oil is found in the world. Now it's a natural thing. Nobody can change that. But what can be changed is the geopolitics of the world, which many countries have indeed done. So what role do resources play in security? They play a significant role in security. We have seen in various times, especially in the last 50 years, how developed countries, of course led by USA, have invaded so many countries which were resource rich, which were like Iraq, like Iran, Afghanistan. Then we have the examples of CUET, how USA has invaded many of these countries, Yemen also, Syria also, which are resource rich, and that has impacted the geopolitics. And it's a very controversial thing. USA never accepts that argument, but it is indeed true in the larger scheme of things. They have always invaded countries which are resource rich, and oil is a resource that has dominated the global push for energy throughout the 20th century, and it continues to do so. Only now we have started to think of renewable sources of energy, electricity, electric vehicles, mobility and all that. But until now, especially for the last 100 years, oil has been the dominating resource for the global growth. So economic and strategic importance of resource distribution cannot be undermined. Economically, these resources are highly important, and as we know, economy is the primary criteria to become a superpower, and hence the countries that are superpowers today have somehow either got the resources by themselves, or they have managed to get those resources through Sam, Dam, Dand, Bhed. They have done everything that is in their power to gain a hold of those resources so that they can become economically prosperous. And in certain cases, the resources are of strategic importance. That means in defeating another country from becoming a superpower, or in gaining allies, or by way of gaining allies. So in over a large part, the Cold War was a war of strategic advantage, what you can say. So those countries were at odds with each other, the USA and USSR, and it was a fight of gaining allies as well. So resources played a major role in that. And the global balance of power can also be altered with the help of resources. Now these countries are the Middle Eastern countries like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Qatar. Now these countries did not have anything significant. If you look back 100 years, they were nothing. They were desertified countries, without having any climatic advantage and without having any other thing to grow. But the moment oil was discovered in the Middle East, it changed their fortunes forever. So their significance is, it cannot be undermined. However, when the world started to realize that climate change is real, that environment is playing such an important role, then we had to take a coordinated action against it. For example, Mr. Shashi Tharoor puts it really well. He says that the problems without passports require solutions without passports, which simply means that if there is a problem which is a global problem and it is not restricted by the political boundaries of countries, then all the countries should take coordinated action against it. For example, it can be said of like COVID-19, the entire world faced the brunt of it. So we had to take a collective solution, like the vaccinations were developed by coordination among various countries. Then the second thing could be terrorism. Terrorism is a global problem, so we need coordinated global action against terrorism. Similarly is climate change, because no matter which country is responsible for it, the entire world has to bear the brunt, because this planet is the only place we know to live. If we had another planet, then it would have been a different situation, but we have this only planet, and we have to learn to live here. Hence, the solution for climate change also has to be coordinated. And due to that, the world met for the first time in the Stockholm Conference in 1972. This is a global coordinated action against climate change. So the world met for the first time in Stockholm in 1972 so that coordinated action can be taken to tackle climate change. And this is known as the first climate change conference in the world. And recently we celebrated the 50th World Climate Change Conference. So 1972 till 2022, we have come a long way, but we have a longer way to go, in fact. So what came out of this conference was that every country will pass legislations so as to control pollution and all. 20 years after that, in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, the United Nations Conference for Environment and Development took place, and we talked of sustainable development. Now, sustainable development meant that we have to do economic development, but not at the cost of ecological destruction. So we have to strike a balance between ecology and economics. That is what this conference was all about. And an agency that came out of this conference was the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. And this is the agency that continues to conduct annual climate change conferences. And the last couple of conferences, especially in the 2015 and in 2021, have been extremely important. So this UNFCCC is the body that coordinates the global action against climate change in today's world. Then in 2012, there was a conference that took place. Now this was called Rio Plus 20 because it was taking place 20 years after the Rio Summit of 1992. So that is how we have progressed step by step to save the climate, to save the planet. Now here in the Earth Summit, UN Conference on Sustainable Development, we put an agenda of what we want to achieve by 2030. And we had broad goals that we categorized for sustainable development. So these are the 17 goals that the world agreed that we want to achieve by 2030. For example, no poverty. There should be zero poverty, zero hunger, good health, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation. Now you might be thinking that some of these goals are not in the domain of environment and ecology, but that's all right. We want to achieve a sustainable life that covers all the dimensions of human life and planet. So it includes education as well, health as well, hunger, poverty, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice and strong institutions. So we have covered almost everything, and in the end the partnership, global partnership to attain all these goals, to achieve all these goals. So this is something that's very broad based. So by 2030 every country is expected to achieve all these, but these are just broad goals, 17 broad goals. Now within these goals there are targets which are quantified and which can be measured. They are not very generic, they are not very general, they can be measured. For example, if the broad goal is quality education, the targets would be like the literacy rate, the dropout rate, the child literacy rate, the women literacy rate, adult literacy rate, things like that, which can be measured. So there are targets. So under these 17 goals there are more than 169 targets which have to be achieved by 2030. Anyway, taking forward the 1992 agenda of UNFCCC, we made Kyoto Protocol of 1997 so that emissions can be reduced. World over, the emissions of countries can be reduced, and the deadline of meeting this this goal was 2012. So 15 years from now was the target. In 2012 the target was extended, and finally the commitment period came to an end in 2020. But many years before that we had to sign another agreement that could take forward it's like the Kyoto Amendment period, the Kyoto Protocol period was coming to an end in 2020. So we had to decide in advance what to do post 2020. So we started preparation in 2015 when the Paris Climate Agreement was signed. So it will replace Kyoto Protocol in 2020, and 192 countries including India signed this agreement. Now what were India's commitments under the Paris Climate Deal? This is very, very important and very interesting as well. So India said, number one, that 40% of the total electricity will be from non-fossil fuel based sources by 2030. That means if India was producing 1000 gigawatts of electricity by 2030, out of that at least 400 gigawatts shall be from renewable sources. That is the first commitment that India made. Second, 33 to 35% reduction in carbon emissions as a proportion of GDP by 2030. So whatever carbon emissions India was doing in 2005, 33 to 35% less emissions would be done by 2030 from that level in proportion of GDP. So if GDP rises, in proportion of that rise, 33 to 35% reduction in carbon emissions. This is the second target. Third, creating 2.5 to 3 billion tons CO2 equivalent of carbon sink, where carbon dioxide can sink, which means afforestation and forests will be installed in India. trees will be cultivated in India, so that additional carbon sink can be generated. But it seems even this much was not enough. So the world held another conference 6 years hence, and this is the COP26, the Conference of Parties 26 in 2021, that is last year itself. So last year, November 2021, the world renewed its commitments, and these are India's new commitments to save the climate. First, 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel based electricity by 2030. So from 40% we have gone up to 50%. Second, so 50% of its energy from to the renewable by 2030. This is kind of similar goal. Third, India will reduce total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons from now to 2030. New target that we will reduce our carbon emissions in absolute terms by 1 billion tons by 2030. Then earlier it was 33 to 35% emission reduction. Now it is 45% emissions reduction, which is a very challenging goal. And then a new goal that India will achieve net zero emissions by 2070. So in 2070, India will not be contributing any climate change to the world. So whatever we will generate, we will consume as well. So we will be in net zero country by 2070. If every country becomes net zero, that means the climate change will stop, right? So that is what it means. So 2070, still it's an ambitious target because India is a big country, it's a developing country, it has a lot of population, so it needs a lot of energy consumption and production so as to keep, or so as to bring millions of people out of poverty. Still a very, I would say, ambitious goal that India has set. Although many developed countries have, criticized India for such a goal, but India knows that it is quite challenging to do that. Then resource geopolitics. I've already told you how oil has created created a lot of rift among countries and has resulted in geopolitics throughout the 20th century. Then water may be doing that in the near future, because water is becoming a scarce resource as we move forward in the 21st century. And in fact, data, as they say, data is the new oil. So data privacy, data mining, cryptocurrency, artificial intelligence, machine learning, these are the areas that are becoming the source of rift among countries. In fact, we are seeing cyber attacks from one country to another, which are becoming a source of concern. So this is how resources, their definition is changing. It's no longer only natural resources that are found in the form of oil and water. In fact, data can be a resource now, because the entire global economy is based on data and how it is generated. So that is how the definition of warfare is changing. That is how the definition of security is changing. So if the world is to move forward, if the world is to have a proper cohesive relationship among all the countries, then these resources, their distribution and their security has to be ensured. And there needs to be a global rule-based order, so that no country can act out of dominance, or no country can have a sort of advantage over the other when it comes to resource distribution and resource allocation. That is what will make the world a better place. So a rules-based global order is the ultimate solution to all these problems, so that those wars, those conflicts can be avoided in the name of resources. And that is the role that resources are playing in the global politics. So that is all for this issue. I hope you will try to relate whatever news you will read in the newspaper on how this thing is a resource and how it can play a role in the global geopolitics. So that is all that we have to discuss, or I had to brief you in this particular session. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and also share it with your friends so that they can also benefit from the same. That is all. Thank you so much and take care.